It says that I am recording. We'll give 1 or 2 more minutes here and get started. We're up to 33 participants, which was how many I was expecting. So that's great. Thanks for everyone showing up on time and getting this going. We'll wait 1 more minute, and then to be respectful for everybody's time, we'll get started. In the meantime, if everyone could mute their line. I can mute all. There we go. Okay, I muted everybody, but you should still be able to unmute yourself when we get to the question and answer period. So 34 participants, I suggest we get started. Please, I've muted the audio. I haven't figured out how to mute everyone's video, so I suggest that you turn your video off. That'll make sure that we have ample bandwidth for everyone. If you've watched the training videos for Project WAfLS, you probably know my voice well. I'm Rob Miller. I'm the technical coordinator for this program. I've been involved with it from the beginning back in 2014 when we first started thinking about doing it, and have been the lead for the last 3 years. I've stepped away from a state coordinator role to now work with all 8 state coordinators and expand this program to 8 states. So I wanted to talk today, give you really more context about why this program, why we're doing it, and why it works the way that it does. A little more in depth than we did in the training videos. So I'll not really be duplicating much effort from the training videos. I'll complement it. There are a few things that I'll re-emphasize that you heard in there, but hopefully this will be complementary to you. And I'm not going to speak for the whole hour, less than half that time, and then leave ample opportunity for you to ask questions. So it's really your time to ask questions on the content I present, or on the program in general, anything I didn't cover you expected, or just on survey protocol and things like that. So at that time, you'll either be able to ask them in the chat window by typing your question in, or using audio. So I'm going to talk about the need for this program, why it came about, what our objectives are, give you a little more of the history, and talk a little bit about some of the results that we've had. We've had lots of results. I'm not going to cover all of them, but give you an idea of how this is being used and what your contribution will help us achieve. Talk a little more about the survey structure, some final tips, realizing that we're only 2 days away from surveys beginning in parts of our range. And then, like I said, leave ample time for questions and answers. If you saw the training video, you saw this. I really can't start without giving credit to Travis Booms and all the smart people he got together into a room to really make the case that short-eared owls have not received the attention that they need and deserve, and recommend a number of key steps. Specifically, they put forth evidence that there's been a long-term, range-wide, and substantial decline in short-eared owl populations across North America, that the weight of evidence for that decline is convincing. We think it is more than 60% in the last 40 years. So that is a very large drop in the population. However, the magnitude of that drop, it could be larger, remains unclear, and our confidence around that drop is really the trigger there that's missing. So we really need better information to make it actionable and increase our confidence about what really is going on and what really is driving this decline. I think I put this in the training video as well. The Audubon Climate Report, they're predicting the near complete extirpation of short-eared owls from the western United States in the next 60 years. And as I always say, this is a model and all models are wrong, but I work a lot on models, and almost all models have a sense of truth to them as well. So I know this model is wrong in its raw yes, no extirpation answer, but I also know this model is right based on some of the factors that's driving it. But they're using very little information and they're extrapolating very largely into a conclusion, and that's always dangerous. So one of the things we want to do is provide a better picture than this, not just a better one that we like better, but a more accurate, more specific, more actionable picture. And this isn't a criticism of the National Audubon Society that's invested a lot in this. They were doing 400 species across North America, and their technique worked really well for many of those species. This is not a species that it works well for. So this is the best we have, and we're going to do better. Many of you, if you worked with state agencies or been around the state wildlife agencies, Fish and Game departments, Fish and Wildlife departments, know that the short-eared owl has special status in all 8 of our states, 7 listed here. The state agencies in each state are required each 10 years to put together a state wildlife action plan. And that action plan identifies the species that are not on the endangered species list or threatened species list nationally, but deserve attention within the state. And one of those classifications is the species of greatest conservation need, and the short-eared owl is listed in 5 of our 8 states. It's a species of conservation priority, which is a similar designation in Nevada. It's a species of greatest inventory need in Montana, which means they just don't know what to do with it. You know, it suggests that it's probably a species of greatest conservation need, but they don't even have enough data to conclude that. And it's not listed in Utah. It is on their sensitive species list, which is 1 level below this designation. But they are very much supporting our work to try to determine if it should be classified in one of these other classifications. So part of our output will be delivered directly to your local state agencies to help them build the state wildlife action plan, as we've done in Idaho and as we're in the process of doing with Utah right now. So the objectives, I've highlighted this before. We're trying to quantify the population size in each state. Population abundance is difficult from a statistics perspective, but it's the answer that everybody wants. They want to know how many. So all the other metrics of population health are useful, but the state agencies, the raw measure oftentimes is in that population size, as well as those other answers. So we're going to do our best to answer population size in each participating state and assess how those populations fluctuate both spatially and temporally, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Identify their habitat use. So what on the landscape is attracting these birds and keeping those birds and allowing them to be successful in places or not? What are some of the influences affecting that, such as grazing influences? The scientific literature has been a little bit mixed on that for short-eared owls, I'll just say. And then what impacts do we predict of climate? Obviously, the Audubon climate model had dire impacts of climate. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we want to do all this under a statistically rigorous framework. So we aren't just out saying, oh yeah, I saw some owls over there. We're saying we predict that, you know, we can estimate and defend with confidence intervals established this level of population. And then, you know, the end goal is to implement high value conservation actions. And for them to be high value, they need to be directed and specific. And we're providing the foundational information for those actions. So what are some of the challenges with short-eared owls? I study northern goshawks, are my other favorite species. I've studied them for 8 years now. And they're kind of the opposite of short-eared owls in many, many ways, not just because they're forest species versus open land species, but their core biology. Goshawks are predictable, structured, and short-eared owls are completely opportunistic. So the foundation of their niches line up that way. So short-eared owl populations fluctuate more than any other raptor species I know in North America, and probably any in North America. So they may be breeding in high abundance one year in an area and completely absent the following year. They vary spatially, so they may be over here one year and over there the next year. Goshawks have territories, they return to those territories, they're there all the time type of thing, or they return each year. We had a short-eared owl during a breeding season that was tracked from Alaska. One year, it spent the breeding season in southern Idaho, and the very next year, it bred in Alaska. That's the largest breeding dispersal distance I've heard of in any raptor. So these guys are off the chart complicated when it comes to nailing them down of how many are there and where are they. We just don't have the same power as we have with other raptors. They have opportunistic breeding phenology. From a goshawk or red-tailed hawk perspective, the length of time, that the window that they have to initiate a nest is very narrow, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. These guys are 3 months. It's purely driven on food. They can breed in March, or they can breed in June or July. A couple years ago, we had nestlings out of the nest on April 10th in southern Idaho, and 100 miles south, we had birds doing courtship displays in late June, more than 2 months later. So they have that flexibility, and also similar to snowy owls, they have the ability to keep laying eggs. Goshawks lay 2 to 5 eggs, but pretty much they lay 3 and sometimes 4. These guys will lay eggs as long as there's food. So a single female can have 8 or 10 or 11 eggs and young that she's raising. But the very next year, they might not breed at all. And the year after that, they might not breed at all. So it's purely opportunistic. And then they're rare on the landscape. The other thing that we concern ourselves with when we're surveying for animals is that we want to find the animals in sufficient numbers, but not in too high of numbers. For the statistics and the landscape habitat use, all of the number crunching to work out, we have to be in kind of the middle. And these guys are rare enough on the landscape that almost all traditional survey mechanisms fail to get enough detections to be useful. So that complicates it. And with all of these together, with the animals moving around hundreds of miles on the landscape year to year and being opportunistic breeders, it requires a lot of scale. So we can't look at it from an Idaho perspective or a Utah perspective or even a 4-state perspective. That's why we've expanded to 8 states, and that's why we would like to work with our neighbors to the north and other states to the east, is to find out if the population is going down in this location, is it numerically occurring, or are they just moving from place A to place B? And to be successful, you have to be surveying where they came from and where they went to answer that question. So yeah, very fun and challenging species that we all decided to work on. We did look at a number of alternatives before we got started. Why invent a new survey protocol when there's many of them around? Why don't we just use them? Breeding bird survey, highlighted in that Booms et al. Paper, 2014. It's a great program for species that are abundant on the landscape, but they failed to get sufficient detections to even be useful, even at the continental scale. Here, Chris's bird count, we pick them up, but not enough to be useful once again. That's what the Audubon climate model that I saw earlier, that was an all or nothing type of model, that was all based on Christmas bird count data. There's an integrated monitoring for bird conservation regions program that the organization I work for participates in. It's across 13 states. They do the best of any of these programs, but still fall short of what's needed to do population assessment on short-eared owls. It's a morning-based survey. They collect data in a way that's statistically useful for short-eared owls. They just fail to get enough detections. And then we use eBird data, and we thought about doing a focused initiative, trying to encourage people to go out and eBird in the right habitats at the right time of day, but we weren't getting the data we needed to interpret that data back. So if you build all that on top of eBird, you ultimately end up with a project like WAfLS, and that's what we did. So that's how we got here. And we started out in 2015. Actually, we did a couple pilot surveys in 14, but we went statewide in Idaho in 15. Neil Paprocki from Hawkwatch International in Utah did a limited pilot and then expanded it to statewide in 2016. We added Nevada with a partnership with the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and we added Wyoming with the Teton Raptor Center leading that out in 2017, and now we've added 4 more states, bringing on both state agencies like California Fish and Wildlife and other non-governmental agencies like the Owl Research Institute in Montana and the Klamath Bird Observatory in Oregon, and then Washington Fish and Game Department. In Wyoming, the University of Wyoming Biodiversity Institute has kind of taken over the initiative in Wyoming. And so how do we get all this work done for the last 3 years? Well, here's a picture of 2017, and it was all of you guys. 2017, we had 330 people participate in this program across those 4 states. Most of them just birders or naturalists, master naturalist organizations. We had many students, college students, graduate students, high school students that did projects on this bird and went out and did survey for us. We do recruit a number of professional biologists on the program as well, but 82% of the total effort was non-paid volunteer effort from people like you. And that's how it happened, and we're trying to double it again. So I expect over 600 people are participating with this program this year, and it just, you know, I'm in awe when I look at these numbers of all of the people who care enough about this bird and what we're trying to do to go make this happen year after year. We do a lot of different types of data analysis, and I'm not going to go into all of these. My main point is that there is a lot of number crunching from all the data that you guys will submit back in, and we have to crunch it different ways for different questions. There's no one way that we analyze data that's going to answer all of those objectives we had earlier. So we do occupancy modeling for habitat associations, multi-scale abundance modeling for the abundance numbers, for the climate and landscape level type, scale type work. We're using maximum entropy models, and now that our analysis is funded, we plan to bring on some even more sophisticated analytical techniques. And this isn't to say that we ignore all that other data out there. Remember I said there were other programs out collecting data on other bird species. No, we use that as well, and we integrate it where we can to increase the power of our results. So we're using the data from that IMBCR survey across 13 states, and we're using data out of eBird, and we're using the breeding bird survey and Christmas bird count data in our analysis as well. But we use each data point slightly differently and helping us to answer different questions, but it all helps us answer it better. I was going to point out a little bit on this multi-scale. What is multi-scale? When I use multi-scale or hierarchical modeling, it's really the whole tree from down where you're surveying individual points along an individual grid or transect, you know, in each state and program wide. And hierarchical analysis allows us to answer questions at any of these levels. And we can answer them both horizontally and vertically. For example, given that there's an owl at a point and you're at a point, what's the probability that you're going to detect it? Most people would say, well, that's pretty high. Well, actually, it's only about 30 to 40% chance that if there's an owl within a kilometer of you at that point, that you're going to see it. And so we can calculate that and use that number as we're calculating abundance and such. But we don't, that probably doesn't vary by transect, and it probably doesn't vary by state. So we can pool all of the data across all 8 states and make the results in any one state more powerful. So Idaho learns from Utah and learns from Nevada and learns from California and vice versa. And that increases the overall power. So when we're talking about scale up to 8 states, but we're still giving state-specific numbers, we aren't just dividing that and ignoring the boundaries. we're using the data that's common across all 8 states to provide us more accurate, more robust numbers for a single state. And that's what I mean by multi-scale hierarchical modeling, is I can either ask questions horizontally, vertically, and at each of these levels. So hopefully that makes sense. So what are some of our key results to date, realizing that we've been doing this for a few years in the Intermountain West part, specific 3 years in Idaho, 2 in Utah. We've had more than 400 participants have contributed so far. That's a tremendous result for the program, but we also view that you know, that's 400 ambassadors that have learned more about the OWL, that have learned more about the scientific methodology and analytical methodologies we're using, that are out influencing their communities as well. So I view this as a two-way partnership between the participants and the program. It's not all about the program. It's what you are getting out of it as well. And the vast majority of our surveyors, whether they see OWLs or not, say they had a fantastic time and experienced things and learned things that they didn't otherwise. So I think that's a great result. First statewide abundance estimates of the owls. We've directly influenced the Idaho State Wildlife Action Plan. These are updated every 10 years. And we use our 2015 data to basically change the chapter on short-eared owls. Previously, it was, we don't know this, we don't know this, we don't know this. And that changed to, you know, we estimate there's 2,600 short-eared owls, breeding short-eared owls in Idaho, and they're using, you know, shrubland habitats disproportionately less in cheatgrass habitats. You know, they're reasonably friendly with agriculture, and these are actionable things that went into that plan as a result of our work. And we're initiating that same sort of process with Utah, who's updating their plan right now, and it will result in all 8 states. So you look forward to that with your contribution. We've had one WAfLS specific scientific publication and another from the Owl Research Institute that was related, and we have a third in progress right now. So we're not only advancing the conservation side of this, but the scientific knowledge on the species side as well as the methodology knowledge. So those different publications relate to both the methodology of surveying for the species and the results. We do presentations at the state, national, and international level. The World Owl Conference, we were represented there. We've done multiple presentations at the International Raptor Research Foundation conferences. So once again, the science side. And we're consulting with organizations in 3 other states, I forgot Alaska, on leveraging our protocol to their states. Not expanding WAfLS over into Hawaii, but consulting with some so they can take the most successful parts of our program and leverage it there. So that's an amazing amount, and with the program doubling in size, this is going to go right off the charts next year with our contributions, I think. So I look forward to that. So let's talk a little bit about what we've seen the last few years in Idaho and Utah. And this is what we found. These are occupancy rates, which just think of it as abundance. As an index of abundance. It's different, but it's subtly different. We have seen a decline from 2015 numbers to 16 to 17. When we brought Utah on my labels, I replaced the slide, my labels didn't show up. So the orange is Idaho and the gray is Utah, and those are the confidence limits. So Utah showed a decrease between 16 and 17. So you step back and look at this and say, oh, the population's been declining over the last 30, 40 years, and it appears to still be doing so. I hope that is not the case of what we have so far, because this shows that the population level was cut in half in those 2 years. So we're hoping, but we don't know, we're hoping this is the side effect of cyclical population numbers and spatial movement of the populations across the landscape. But some of the reasons why we need to, one, do it for a longer period of time and take a broader spatial scope. We do have some other data from that IMBCR data that I said wasn't sufficient. The thing it is sufficient at is it started earlier. So we have a couple more years of data. And at least on their observations, they showed 2015 as a locally higher year population-wise than other years. In 2013, they detected 0 birds. I know they were out there because I saw them, but they weren't detected on survey. In 2014, just 1 or 2, but did pretty good in 2015, and then it dropped off. So we're hoping this represents a normal up and down of a population that is dynamic based on prey abundance, such as voles. And so with that, I'm not as worried about our drop-off decline numbers in Idaho and Utah in 2017, but if 18 and especially if 19 don't look dramatically different, then this may be indicating a crash, right? And that's why we're critically interested in expanding the scope and keeping the program going. Let's go back to that climate model. Remember, with this very small amount of Christmas bird count data that the Audubon had, they were basically saying, predicting an extirpation from the Intermountain West. Well, here's what our numbers today show. The left-hand picture is what we call a heat map of the probability of short-eared owls using that landscape. And that represents 2016 and 17 combined. So, you know, the northern parts of Nevada and Utah, most of southern Idaho, and eastern side of Wyoming look reasonably good. Most everybody would agree that the northern Utah and the eastern Idaho are the sweet spots for this species. It's got the best historical habitat and the best historical numbers. And our results kind of support that. But the same data that's used to build that current picture on the left-hand side, when applied to the future climate models, shows the picture on the right-hand side. And this is 10 years short of the Audubon's numbers, but it's a bad picture, but not as bad as theirs. So I really, really don't like this projection, and this projection is going to improve with more data, but it does give us a view that, one, the decline suggested by the Audubon model is substantiated by a completely different data set, a completely different analysis approach. That the predicted climate changes occurring in the Intermountain West are going to put increased stress on the short-eared owl species. And it's going to have a range shrinking effect on the population. That, I believe to the core, based on having completed this analysis. But this analysis tells us how that's going to happen. So behind this are all the details, and the details are actionable. So they're specific and they're actionable, whereas the broad Audubon model is not. And that's the hope that we have here. And that's what we're ultimately trying to accomplish. So on that happy note, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about going out and doing your surveys. So that's why we're doing it. Hopefully I instilled that sense in you. But now we have all the training materials out there to talk about how to do it. There's a few things I want to emphasize that are either repeats or kind of expanding on what the training did. The first is the survey dates. We've asked you to do 2 visits to your survey route during 2 different 3-week windows. So in the lower elevations, that begins on Thursday, March 1st, and 3 weeks to do the first visit, and then the next 3 weeks to do the second visit. And then at mid-range elevations, those will come on mid-March. So look at your grid and the one-page maps available on the website. It has the date ranges across the top. And pick out dates that work for you. Hopefully you have the flexibility to be flexible to the weather and the conditions. We know that the best conditions are going to be when the ground is reasonably snow-free. That's hard to predict a year in advance. 2 weeks ago it was approaching time to be surveying, but in Idaho and Utah and Wyoming, Montana, we've been slammed for a week with snow. And so it's no longer the best conditions. So I would encourage people to wait, not run out in at least Idaho, Utah, and places affecting by snowstorms right now. So you want to pick days where most of the snow at your elevation is free. There can be snow drifts and patches, but you shouldn't have snow across the landscape. And we want the ground to be reasonably dry. This is a breeding survey, so we're looking for when the male's doing its courtship flight, and he's going to be trying to attract the female to that nesting site when that nesting site's in good condition. So he's not going to attract a female to go sit on snow or lay eggs on snow or in a mud hole. So if the ground is completely saturated with water or still or covered in snow, it's too early. And you guys are closer to these sites than we are. So we ask that you use that timing. It's best if you survey after a few days of good weather, during good weather, and when the ground conditions are at least interesting for owls to begin their breeding season. So keep that in mind if you have the flexibility. If we were to keep getting snow through next week and into the week after, we might even want to shift the whole window out a week or two. So that's not out of the question. With a species that can vary its breeding by 3 months, we have to try to be as flexible as possible. Survey timing. This is something I emphasized a lot in the training. I'm going to emphasize it again because it's really, really important. Each grid has a schedule of start times based on date. With the days getting longer, that date changes by a few minutes every day. So there is a schedule out there for each grid. Each date, you look on it and it says start your first point at 6:23 p.m. And if you were out there the next day, it would say 6:25 p.m. Please follow those schedules. We know that 10 minutes before darkness, the probability of detecting a short-eared owl is double what it is an hour and a half before darkness. So at the beginning of our survey, we only have half the chance of detecting the owl as we do at the end of our survey. If you were to start that a half hour earlier, it goes down by a half again. So this is our own data that our volunteers have collected that are using to calculate these numbers. It's been consistent year after year after year. So we really ask, do not start before that date on the schedule or that time of day on the schedule. We did have to throw out some data last year from people who did start too early, just because they started too early, they didn't see an owl, but what did that tell us when we know the probability of detecting the owl at that time was less than 10%, given that there was one at the point? So that's the challenge in it. Be sure on your ID, all of the analytical methods we use are robust for missing birds, which means if you miss an ID or you're not sure and you put it down as not sure, all the numbers work. But if you put it down as a short-eared owl, all the numbers assume that to be fact. So you don't have to be 99% or 100%, but we want you to be over 90% sure that that is a short-eared owl if you mark it down as a short-eared owl. So look at the training materials and make sure you're familiar with those. And if you're not sure, there's another box for that down there to put that into. We ask that you communicate with your state coordinator quite a bit. If there's any reason you can't complete a survey route, let them know as soon as possible. They might be able to find a replacement even if you did the first visit and you can't do the second visit, we still want to get that covered. We'll still try to recruit somebody to fill that in. We may ask you, do you have any friends that can maybe help out here? But the more you communicate with the state coordinator, we aren't going to hold that against you. It helps us to know whether you're going to do that or not. Every year we have some cases where we just don't hear from volunteers again. And we don't know if they did their route or didn't do their route, whether the data is coming or not. So please, when you complete your survey, tell your state coordinator. If you're not going to be able to, tell your state coordinator. If you have a question, contact your state coordinator. We do have a private Facebook group that we encourage people to post their findings and post photos, whether they're photos of owls or other birds or other wildlife or things you experienced while you're out there. Road washed out so you can't go any further, or people surveying with their binoculars, things like that. So we just like to participate from afar in your adventures out there as well. Data entry, the data entry portal will be live by next Monday. We're on the finishing touches and testing of that right now. There will be a training video that gives you an orientation for that. It's easy, straightforward, takes 5 or 10 minutes at the most. But please do the data entry. Every year we have people that spend all the time to train on it, spend all the time to go out there and do the survey, and then they don't enter their data. So please get the data there. And then take a friend, take a student, be an ambassador for the OWL and for the science that we're all accomplishing together. So you can reach out to an Audubon group or science teachers or whatever to share your experiences and be a local ambassador for it. And it's more fun when you have other people along. So that was what I wanted to cover today. And like I said at the beginning, I wanted to leave ample time for questions and answers. So hopefully you have some of those ready. You can type those into either the chat box or you can unmute your phone and ask that. As you're prepping those, I'll just note these links down here. It's the public Facebook page where we do all of our general announcements. The private Facebook page, sorry, Facebook will not allow us to rename it, so it's still Idaho Bird Conservation Project, Short-Eared Owl Project. But if you search on WAfLS, it should come up, but you have to request access and you have to say what grid you're surveying. So that group will be restricted to only participants. And then here's a shortened link to the official website where you all signed up. So with that, do we have any questions out there?
Yeah, I do have a couple questions. Mostly centered, I guess, around the grazing qualification. And I apologize, I read through the protocol, but I didn't get a chance to see all the videos. So this might have been covered in that. But so in the description, it sounds like you're more describing heavy grazing is what you're looking for. I have a lot of rangeland. I can almost guarantee that all of it will have been grazed last year, but not grazed this year with the timing of these surveys, because most ranchers won't have been finished calving out yet.
Yeah.
So what, yeah, are you just kind of looking for something that's been like hammered and that counting that as grazing? I'm just trying to figure that out.
Yeah, we are looking for areas that have been grazed at least in the last couple of years. So one study.
The rangeland.
What's that?
So I'm in Eastern Montana. That's everything that's not farmland. Just about is going to be that. Is that fine to just put that it's 100%? It's available for grazing.
Yeah, if they're grazing allotments, whether there are no animals on it or not, and it looks like it has been grazed in the last couple of years, because not all of our grazing allotments are grazed every year. And if it wasn't grazed last year and they aren't out there this year, it's not going to look that grazed. A study has come out that said grazing is 100% incompatible with short-eared owl. But that's not what we have found with this study. We have found intermediate levels of grazing to be highly compatible. So we're trying to get at that a couple ways. we're trying to get at with the raw, just am I in a place that is grazed? And yeah, your whole route, oftentimes, like an entire grid survey will be 100%. You know,
Okay.
and others will be in places that aren't. You know, so that's to be expected. And then we ask you how many animals are out there. So I was in a place down near Riddle last year. It was very heavily grazed. The shrubs were like chewed way back, but no animals were visible because we weren't out there. They weren't out there yet. Right? So that's 100% zero animals.
Okay.
So.
And on the note, I'm assuming from what you said earlier that prairie dog towns we're not going to count, or I guess we do if they're in rangeland anyways, but we're not going to try to distinguish between those things with the vegetation height level there.
So you're talking about prairie dog mounds that are elevating the shrubs because the shrubs are growing on the mound?
No, I'm talking about prairie dog towns that have little to no vegetation on them. So basically they're grazing. So they're, which I guess maybe you already answered it then by saying if that is within a unit that gets grazed, and then it's grazed period, and not trying to differentiate between like bare dirt from prairie dog towns.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I have one more. I see there's a bunch in the chat. If there's forest land on the route, do we just try to skip it, or you just go and
put that in other.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, most of our routes do not have that, but we definitely have a number of routes that'll have juniper and some of that, and maybe some corner areas that have other conifers. So other would be the appropriate candidate for that.
All right, thank you.
I'll go to a couple of the chat ones. The Wyoming State Coordinator, all of the State Coordinator contact links are on the website. So if you go to this bit.ly WAfLS, sorry it's case sensitive and you can't have a slash at the end, but it is shorter than the Avian Knowledge Network Great Big Long One that you may have seen. And you go to contacts, the contacts for each state coordinator is listed up there. In Wyoming, we did recently have a change. Juliet Slutzker from the Biodiversity Institute took another job, and her replacement has been hired and will be on board next week. Brian Barber at the Biodiversity Institute is filling in the meantime. How do I figure out how to get to my survey area? So there's a couple options on that. You can contact your state coordinator for help. We tried to validate that all survey grids have county roads or accessible roads into them. Sometimes in some of the new states, maybe we missed one. On the main website, under resources, there are single page maps that should show the roads through your grid areas, one for each grid. There's also a Google Earth map that you can download so you can zoom in, zoom out, and get a hang of it that way. But if those online resources don't help, contact your state coordinator. Can I get copies of the peer-reviewed literature you mentioned that has been published from studies that WAfLS has conducted? Yes, the 2016 paper published is on the website under Reports and Publications link. That was published in the Journal of Avian Conservation and Ecology. The OWL Research Institute paper, which is the one that picked out this leading up to Civil Twilight Road Survey portion of the protocol, we don't have on the website right now. I don't think we have rights to distribute that, but the author would, Matt Larson in Montana. Let me look into that. And then the last paper I mentioned is the proceedings from the World Owl Conference, and that's currently in peer review. So if you had an urgent need, I could give you a copy, but we can't distribute that document until it completes peer review. So as a collaborator, you could contact me through sending me a message through Facebook Messenger to Project WAfLS, and I can get that to you. The training videos are on the website. So once again, go to this bit.ly/WAfLS 2018. It is case sensitive. And under resources, there are 7 training videos right there that talk everything about some of the introduction purpose down to choosing your route, to completing the surveys, etc. There's also a protocol guide out there that you should be familiar with. Neither of us are on Facebook. Can we enter our data using the WAfLS webpage? Yes, the data will be entered. The official data goes into the data entry portal on the WAfLS webpage. The Facebook is just, hey, I went out, did a survey last night, I didn't find anything, but I saw this, you know, and post a photo type of thing. So it's just kind of a community posting. It's not a data thing. The data doesn't go into Facebook, it goes directly into the Avian Knowledge Network site. And that page is up there for data entry, but there's nothing on it right now. We are in the final testing, and that'll be live on Monday to start receiving survey data. All these surveys are right before sunset. Why aren't there any surveys at sunrise? That's a great question. These owls are out at sunrise as well, but we're trying to capture the courtship flight display of the male. That's a time of year, out of the entire year, that's the time of greatest detectability. So the whole timing of the schedule, like the March, April timeframe versus a little later in the year, that whole timing is to try to catch this flight display. It's an elaborate flight display where the male spirals up 500 feet into the air and tumbles out of the sky, clapping his wings with an audible clap and pulling up just before he hits the ground and repeating that. You can see it for almost a mile away when it happens. And that's the point of highest detectability, and they don't do that in the morning much. And so our probability of detecting the birds would be lower in the morning. We could still do surveys, and all those other surveys I mentioned are morning-based surveys, but they just don't detect the birds. Can a questionable ID be verified by returning the next evening or two? I would say yes. You know, these are territorial birds, and we do find them in the same places day after day, and often between your first and second visits, you'll have them at the same point or the next point. If you can't get a positive ID and you do get a positive ID in the same place in the next day or two, I would accept that as a positive ID. Like barn owls. Yeah, so the barn owl mortality study, short-eared owls are susceptible to roadway mortality, but they avoid the interstate. So for the rest of you on the phone, hundreds, actually about 1,000 barn owls per year die on the Interstate 84 between Boise and about American Falls Reservoir area each year. And mostly in the winter time, like late fall, winter time frame, but it happens 12 months of the year. And Boise State has been studying that for some time with the Fish and Game Department and Idaho Transportation Department. And in over 5,000 carcasses picked up along the river, along Interstate 84, only 2 short-eared owl carcasses have ever been found in that study. So they avoid that area. However, roadway mortality on short-eared owls is common on less traveled, similar roads. So very flat, straight roads that get very few cars on them. we have mortality problems. Think of Simcoe Road near Boise, or a few years ago in June, we had 36 dead short-eared owls in a 3-week period along the highway that heads from Mud Lake up towards Salmon. So that last perfectly straight, perfectly flat stretch of road that has a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, but most people do 80, and 36 short-eared owls, barn owls, burrowing owls, great horned owls, all right in that area. So they are susceptible, but not on the interstate. So we're getting some help here on the online chat. State coordinators doing their job. I love it. But I've printed our map. Do I decide where within the grid I do my survey, or will that? So the survey route within your grid, there is a training video specifically for how to choose that. Just a couple of the key points. You want a road that's accessible, a road that has some turnoffs, a road with not very much traffic. So try to be as far away from an interstate, for example, as you can. You know, a mixture of habitats, things like that. And I do some case studies in that short video. So I really encourage you to look at that. If, you know, some routes, there's one road through the grid, it's pretty obvious, but a lot of them, there are different choices. So take a look at that video. Okay, any other audio questions? Julie Hall has a hand up. Is that mean you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, I can now.
Okay, great. So we're going to be out in the vicinity of our grid counting sage grouse on 3 separate occasions that fall within the survey period.
Okay.
Can I take the 2 best observations at the right time intervals out of 3? We'll probably go look for owls on 3 times, or is that going to skew the data?
I do not want you to look 3 times.
Okay.
The way, the assumptions behind the data analysis is I mean, you're free to do it, but you need to decide beforehand whether that's going to be your survey or not. I mean, if you go out one of the nights and the wind is really high and you just call it off before you complete the survey, fine. But if you do the survey and then you do once and you do the survey a second time and then you go to do the 3rd time and you detect an owl, I don't want that in the official results unless you had decided beforehand that you were going to take the 2nd and 3rd visits, and the first one was practice. So decide beforehand, unless it's weather driven. Great question.
Great, thank you.
And thank you for looking for sage grouse as well. Short-eared owls and sage grouse have a good overlap in habitat quality. So great quality, like in southern Idaho here, the best sage grouse habitat in the state has quite a few short-eared owls in it. So they are complementary, at least overlap in their habitat preferences. Kristen Lynch? I can't hear you if you're talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So you had mentioned the weather being a factor for some of our dates. Would that be something that's going to be updated on the Facebook page, or how would we know, you know, depending on our grid, what the weather is going to be like? I've got a grid kind of out in the Waihees, and I'll be just sort of guessing, I guess, kind of going by the weather reports, or.
Yeah, and so we aren't saying that the weather has to be perfect for your grid, but you know, if it's 25 gusting to 30 mile an hour winds, you probably don't want to be out there. And I can say the short-eared owls probably aren't feeling very amorous at that time doing their flight displays that are going to be disrupted by high wind. So the best we can do in all of our surveys is look at the weather report and say, hey, tonight looks like it's going to be a reasonable day. I'm going to do it. And you get out there, the wind's a little stronger than you thought, or light drizzle occurs, no big deal. But if it's 80% chance of rain with winds 20 to 30, I wouldn't even head out there.
Okay.
If you have the flexibility.
Okay.
So the statistics account for some of these characteristics. They account for the time that you do the survey, and they account for the date that you do the survey, and they account for the wind conditions and sky conditions and all that stuff. But they can't make up for everything. They're just looking at, we detected more when in low wind conditions, and we detected more earlier in April than later, or something like that. And so we just have to do the best, and then we are doing 440 survey grids. So a lot of this stuff gets averaged out, right? And that's how the statistics work.
Bob, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we're doing ID 25. We're down by Blackfoot.
Yeah.
And we had the unfortunate problem having two highways going through there, I-15 and I-91. So it kind of limits our road choices. We're going to go out tomorrow and just explore the road we think we're going to use. If for some reason we don't get the full 6 miles, can we kind of loop around using just try to find some way to get 6 miles by looping through other roads that are out there? If we can't find the stretch, there's not too many, it's mostly little farm to market type roads.
Yeah. And those are great roads to be on. I'm not familiar exactly with 25. I was going to pull up Google Earth real quick to.
Yeah, it's hugging all around Blackfoot, with the most of it just being east of Blackfoot.
Yeah, I would stay a mile away from the interstate. That's the big one.
Which is kind of, yeah, that's the big one. The 91 unfortunately cuts right down the middle of the grid. So we're going to try to go from WAfLS down, straight down, so we kind of get as far away as we can. Try to get. We Googled it, and it looks like it's mostly farmland. And
yeah.
some marshland out there as well. So it looked like good habitat, but I'm worried whether we'll be able to get a full 6 mile stretch.
Yeah, and if you are avoiding high disturbance areas like the interstate, you can extend a bit out of the grid. So here's the thing on the grids. The grids are about general placement of the survey route. We ask people to stay within the grids if possible. They can move it for access purposes. So if there's only 4 miles of road within the grid, you can extend outside the grid for a couple miles. If access is the reason, there's a road out, or bridge out, or snow, or things like that. And I would accept disturbance, staying at least a mile away from the interstate, or Highway 91, I would put as a requirement. So, like, cut that out, stay a mile away from there, and see what you can do. And if there's only 4 miles inside the grid, then go ahead and extend outside the grid for a little bit. What I don't want you to do is say, oh, there's some good habitat over there, 5 miles. I'm going to go over there and survey there instead. That is against the assumptions, that doesn't work from the statistics perspective. But
okay, good, because the road we're going to take actually has another road that kind of sort of is just a little out of the grid, but it kind of backtracks. So it would still probably keep us about 75% of the time within
yeah.
So not very far out the rest of the time.
Yep.
Thank you.
Do we have any more typed questions here? Or hands up? All right, well, I will just re-emphasize, any questions at all, contact your state coordinator. I know that Heather's been jumping in here. She's our Idaho state coordinator, answering some questions here on how to get to the contacts. That contact information is on the full website. I apologize, this link down here, this bit.ly link is case sensitive, so you have to pay attention to the lowercase f, and there's no slash at the end of it. Bit.ly shortens links, but is very, very temperamental as far as details like that. But, you know, contact us, ask questions. We'll get you answers as soon as possible. And go back to that, you know, take a friend, take a student, be an ambassador, have fun. Those are the important takeaways. So thank you all for your time, and enjoy the rest of your evening.